Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can we first go to item 1 on the agenda, the appointment of chairman, which is to note that Mrs Fry was nominated chairman-elect to this committee at the annual meeting of the County Council held on the 15th of May. Can I ask the committee to confirm that this is agreed? Any seconders?
Can I propose that? Please.
Okay, Mrs Fryer.
Thank you very much and welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can everyone please switch their microphones on when speaking and turn it off when you have finished? And also, could you make sure your phones are on silent or switched off? Thank you very much. We now come to item 2, which is the election of the Deputy Chairman. I'd like nominations, please.
I'd like to propose Mrs Seaton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is that agreeable, Mrs Seaton?
That's perfectly
Good.
agreeable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The minutes of item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of March. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of March are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Thank you. Item 4. I have received 3 questions from Miss Louise Engels, under Standing Order 35. Could Mrs Engels, would you like to come to the table, please? Thank you. Everyone should have a copy of the questions and answers, so these can be taken as read. Ms Engels, would you like to ask any supplementary questions? You can ask 1 supplementary question per question, but I would highlight that they have to just to clarify the answers that have been given and should not raise any new issues. Thank you very much.
I'm a newbie. I'm a new girl. There we are. Well, no, thank you very much for the answer to the questions. They're very informative. I just would like to clarify there's a whole list of support that children can receive, but I'm still not sure that my question's answered, in that children are unlikely to be able to access these when schools are still refusing to accept the earliest signs of struggling, and that children may mask their conditions, and so it can be very detrimental to the children, and it is very detrimental. And I do believe that health and social care need to be aware of the implications of cuts to school and SEND budgets and the limited access to EdPsychs to understand why children struggle to attend, and the same with school and social care, understanding waiting times and thresholds for paediatricians and CAMS and comorbidities and those kind of things. So although we have those policies and there are things that are available to children, they're not available, the majority of them, unless schools acknowledge that these are needs. And that's very detrimental to our children, my children personally actually, and children of families that I work with. So really the question is, there is so little accountability with schools to follow the policies that we've had listed, how are parents going to access these resources when their children need them but might not meet a threshold, or a school might not acknowledge?
Thank you very much.
That's my first question anyway. Thank you.
Yes. Ms Moore, would you like to answer that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the further questions. Just for clarity, in terms of access to services, both children and their families can directly access a number of our services. So absolutely acknowledge what you're saying in terms of identification, but we also know that the majority of our referrals, certainly for our early help services, come either direct from parents or other agencies.
Yeah.
So there is still access for agencies. Just on the point around accountability to schools, there is an accountability framework around all of our schools, some of which the local authority is involved in, some of which the local authority isn't because there are various academies. But outside of the meeting, I can obviously provide information around the framework for accountability for schools as well.
Thank you. The second one was about the EHCP process taking so long and what happens to these children who are then left in mainstream relatively unsupported. I accept that, you know, you're talking about 20 weeks, but that doesn't include those going to mediation. It doesn't include those who have been conceded, and it also doesn't include where you have to go through an appeal to assess, an appeal to issue, and then an appeal on content. So that just adds up to, you know, over a year of a child's life, basically. So if these children aren't coping in the meantime, they're still expected to attend their mainstream provision. Again, going to these things such as Oakfield short stay and all of those things, they're not accessible to these children because they're kind of trapped in a no man's land between mainstream and having their EHCP. So what can be done then for those children, because they are, in my experience of my own children and other children, they are now coming out of school with school trauma, PTSD, and they're likely to have more complex difficulties than had their needs been addressed in the first place.
Thank you. I'll just pick up both of those. Obviously, as we've set out in the response, there are statutory timescales that we work to. And as we've set out in the response, the assessment can take up to 20 weeks. And then obviously if there's an appeal, so I understand you appreciate the statutory timeframes working in. Part of what we're doing, and we've set it out in one of the reports in the papers, is looking at how we can work to support children and young people outside of an education and health and care plan at an earlier opportunity. And what that ought to then do is mean that there's support available for children that doesn't rely on getting an education, health and care plan in order to mitigate exactly the circumstances that you're raising. We know we don't get it all right at the moment, and we know that there are children that are waiting, but part of our strategy is about how we can work earlier on with children and families in order to mean that they're not waiting for the plan in order to get the support as well.
Thank you very much. You have one more question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you for that. That's really, really good to know. And also, I'm just grateful that Not Finding School is acknowledged as being quite a useful resource, and I wondered who is going to be overall responsible for the later in the year developing the pathway, and you know, in the meantime, can some of this message at least be getting out through the local offer, through local ed psychs who are currently still emphasising that children who are struggling, it's likely to be a parenting issue, might need early help, rather than emphasising the masking. So it's about acknowledging in what way these children are fine and a working definition of fine. And I wondered if that could go into the local offer, but also, yeah, who would I be working with? I'm looking at you. Thank you.
Yes, as we put in the response, the literature and information on the Not Finding School website is a really useful resource, and whilst we wouldn't be sending the literature directly out from the local authority, as we've said, we are keen to work with you and other parent and carers across the county to develop resources. So I understand you've got a contact already with our inclusion service manager, so she'll be making direct contact with you, in order to progress the work.
Thank you very much. You are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you wish, but we quite understand if you have other places to go. Would it be possible for us to have the framework of accountability for schools. Could that be circulated to members, please? We now move on to item 5. I've had no questions from members. I've had no urgent items referred to this committee. Do any members have interests or declarations of interest they wish to declare at this time, please? Silence? No, nobody has any declarations of interest. Any declarations of the party whip? No, thank you very much. And we have no petitions under Standing Order number 36. We now move on to the first main item of the agenda, which is starts on page 11 of your agenda pack, and it is the care placement strategy. And I will call on the director to take us through this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So the report set out before you is an update around our work on the care placement strategy, which is an overarching document that brings together a number of key strategies across the department, looking at our overall pathway of the edge of care through to leaving care. So we've attached the care placement strategy in Appendix A, and it outlines our ambition for how it will design, develop, deliver and commission services of high quality to place children and their needs at the centre. It also sets out the departmental vision for Leicestershire that for the department that Leicestershire is the best place for all children and families. So the care placement strategy is underpinned by an understanding of the needs of vulnerable children, including children with disabilities, complex needs, and those with complex and challenging behaviour. And our ambition is to offer a flexible, responsive services that work towards improved outcomes for children and families across Leicestershire. So there are a number of key components that make up the care placement strategy, and that is our work around edge of care, our care placement sufficiency, Leicestershire's offer to care leavers, and also our commissioning arrangements. And the strategy is overseen by the Care Placement Strategy Board. So just an update around the Children's Innovation Partnership. So in 2018, innovative work was undertaken by the County Council to explore establishing a partnership with an external agency that would enable much more creative working to design and develop services for children and families. So following a tendering process, Barnardo's were successful, and this has resulted in the beginning of a partnership which started on the 1st of December last year. There are a number of members of the senior management team in Barnardo's now co-located with the department. And whilst the partnership is still in its very early stages, there are some green shoots really around some of the work that we're doing. The first of which is a successful application to the Department for Education of a grant for nearly 800,000, which is for us to provide holiday activities for 4 weeks over the summer holidays, for 4 days, for 4 hours, including food or the provision of a meal. The offer will be to approximately 2,500 young children and young people who are eligible for free school meals. We've also engaged the Barnardo's Independent Child Trafficking Advocacy to train our foster carers, and also had a number of sponsorship opportunities already. We were also nominated as a finalist for the Go Award, and on the 30th of April we were highly commended as part of the Innovations category. So the Innovations Partnership is a real testament to the ambition within the County Council to provide high quality services, and it really is key to driving the work in the care placement strategy. So on to some areas of progress around our edge of care. Our ambition is that wherever it's safe to do so, families should be supported to care for their children, and children should be afforded the chance to grow up within their family. And this ethos runs throughout the organisation through the work in early help and children's social care. So we have got some work underway to further develop the role of our family intervention workers within our children's social care locality teams, to work intensively with families to improve children's outcomes and family resilience. And it will specifically focus with children who are on the edge of care or vulnerable to coming into care. And as outlined in paragraph 15, whilst the number of children in care in Leicestershire has grown, the growth is steadier than we did forecast, and it still remains below that of our statistical neighbours. And we have a number of key panels in place that look at the oversight and quality assurance and decision making for these children. We've also improved our offer on short breaks to families, and we've got some detailed work being undertaken at the moment to support vulnerable mothers. So in terms of our care placement sufficiency, the partnership with Bernardo's is helping us to design and develop a brief for what placement types we need to support our children and young people in care. And we're undertaking a number of pieces of work to develop the design briefs to progress this. Around our foster carer recruitment and retention, over the last 12 months there's been increased and significant improved activity in the retention and recruitment of foster carers. So over the last year, we recruited 25 new foster carer households, and in the same period, we also recruited 8 new specialist carer households. And our dedicated support team continues to provide support to those children in care who are struggling in order to prevent placement breakdown. And we've detailed in paragraphs 21 and 22 some of the successes of that team over the last year. And then in June 2018, as part of our Invest to Save initiative, the County Council has commissioned Action for Children to deliver our multi-intensive systemic team in Leicestershire. And this is predominantly working with children in residential care to support them to either return home or to other family-based care. And there are a number of early indications of success within this work as well. And then finally, onto our work with care leavers. We've successfully completed a number of pieces of work around our children in care and care leavers. And part of this was revising our pledge in line with the additional responsibilities we have. And this led to the launch of our promise, which we've attached as an appendix, which was launched on the 1st of April and signed up to by a number of partner agencies as well as members from the County Council. Alongside this piece of work, we've also mapped out priorities around health, wellbeing, accommodation and support, education, employment and training, and work is being undertaken across all of these key areas and reported into the Children and Families Partnership and Corporate Parenting Board. And then just to end, another key area of success for our care leavers is the agreement across all 7 of the district councils to exempt care leavers from council tax up to the age of 25, and this came into force on the 1st of April this year. Thank you.
I have 2 or 3 people asking questions. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. I found the report a very useful update, and certainly in terms of progress that we've made. I just want a little bit of clarification because I struggle with how names of things we do change with time. I realise that the use of specialist carers is very important in driving down some of the incredible costs that are associated with residential care, and also it's the right thing to do for the children. But in the past, we've talked about these carers as level 6 was a phrase I remember well. But in this report, we've now got one-to-one and then the word pathway. So can I check, is one-to-one and pathway a different thing? And then my second part of my question is about MISL. Do MISL actually work with some of these specialist carers to improve the skill set the specialist carer? I'm getting nods already from Sharon, but I think I'll shut up because I think I'm going to get the answers I want.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In relation to one-to-one carers, they are our specialist carers who receive a higher payment. They are people that have recruited with usually a professional background and skill set. And during the time that a young person is with them, they don't have any other children in that placement. So they work very intensively with that young person and with the team around that young person to move them successfully on to either living back with their family, if they're older young people, into appropriate supported accommodation, or down to being with a foster family and able to live within a family setting. Our pathway carers are not at that exact level, but these are carers that do have a skill base and can work possibly with more than one young person, but that will support those young people. So probably young people with a level of a higher level of need, but not the challenges that the young people that go to our specialist one-to-one carers. Okay. In relation to MISL, we are working with Action for Children at identifying more specialist care, more one-to-one carers who can support when ready young people to step down from residential care into a family-based placement. And we've seen and are seeing some success with that for a number of young people. There are two things we're doing. One is that we are actively recruiting to one-to-one carers who are coming in to work specifically with young people who are part of the MISL project. But we have also utilised as appropriate, our one-to-one carers that we've already got recruited and assessed, so it's the best match for that young person. And what the staff in MISL are doing is working alongside our recruitment and retention teams within fostering, so they are being part of the recruitment of all carers, so they're opening up all carers' eyes to some of the things that they could be involved in. They are supporting the training of carers so that we are constantly skilling up and providing support to all our carers, and they then specifically work alongside the young people that are identified to work with them, with their carers, so that we are providing a successful package for those youngsters. And although the numbers are relatively small, as we'd expect, that's what we planned for, because these are some of our youngsters that have had the most challenges. We are seeing success in the placements and success for the young people about giving them an opportunity to move from, as appropriate, from residential. One youngster has been able to move back home successfully to his family. Another youngster has moved on to independent living successfully, and another two have moved into foster placements. And at the meeting I chaired this morning, we've identified 2 other young people who are ready as we identify carers to step down.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really good news. I think a family setting has got to be the right place for young children, if at all possible. And I think we need to recognise there will be some exceptional cases where they can't, but this approach is clearly bearing fruit and is successful, and I think it's good news.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Walsh. Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask a question first. Is the target audience of the care placement strategy, who would that be, please?
The target audience originally, or initially rather, would be for all professionals that are working with young people. We would want this to be an outward-looking document that can be shared with families and young people. But what we would want to do is, although they can have a copy of this, is we would want to spend some time just explaining the information.
Okay. Therefore, probably some of my comments I'm going to make, if it's just aimed at professionals, or like the acronym of CFS at the top, probably making it, at the top of page 21, in putting the full name of that. Again, it depends on the target audience. But if we go back to the footnote at the bottom of page 21, paragraph 5, the departmental priorities, and I can't read that without saying that all the children in Leicestershire, instead of a statement, it's telling me that all children in Leicestershire are living in a safe and stable environment. It would read better to me if you put that is your priority, that all children in Leicestershire are living in safe and stable environments. And that goes with all of those. Well, with the majority of them. It's not just adding the word that. But I think some of the wording of the statements needs to be probably a little bit more, less of a statement than more what you want to achieve. Okay, yes, an aspiration. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think just to clarify, the information on page 21 has been lifted from our department plan. So the way in which it's been written does set it out as if they are statements, but these are, so the top one is our vision, that Leicestershire is the best place, and the ones under bullet 5, as you've outlined, they are our priorities. So our priorities are that, all children. So you're right, the wording is slightly different in the departmental plan, so it sets it out more clearly. I think we've lifted it quite differently for this strategy, but I take your points entirely.
Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report on progress to date. I do appreciate that we're in the first year of a 3-year strategy, and I think for the record it would be helpful to hear where do you expect us to be with this in a further 12 months.
So I don't think the answer is a simple single answer. So as I outlined in the report, this strategy brings together a number of different work streams that are going on, all of which will have different timelines for completion. So, for example, the work that we're doing around the Edge of Care strategy has a number of actions attached to it. So the work around relooking at the role our family intervention workers are undertaking, for example, is starting now, and we would expect for some of that work to start seeing some fruition, certainly within the next 6 to 12 months. The overarching ambition remains the same in terms of, as I set out at the beginning, around what we would want for our children. So again, the work we're doing around the design of the residential strategy, we're looking at a report back in September that enables us to fully understand what our needs are, with a view to developing the work for children who are currently in residential care or who need to be in the future. So in summary, where I would expect us to be in 12 months is to be presenting some really clear outcomes under each of the progress areas. So, for example, we would want to be coming back to say Missile has been successful with this many children and these are the outcomes for those children. We would want to be saying in a year's time this is the outcome of the work with children on the edge of care. We would certainly want to see some impact around the numbers of children that we have within residential care and that children are placed appropriately. So I wonder if what would be helpful is that we come back with a number of measures that we'd be looking to demonstrate the success of the strategy in order for us then to be setting out where we would be and where we anticipate being.
Yes, well, I'm happy with that. It seems like you're pushing forward gradually on all fronts. It would, well, that's a strategy, of course. So yeah, we'll see where you get to with that then.
I wanted to look at the wording regarding the aspiration about Leicestershire as the best place for all children, young people and their families. Now, it is understood that the County Council wishes to provide the best possible service, and we want positive outcomes for all the children. And certainly point number 3 in your initial notes states Leicestershire is ambitious for its children and aspires to provide high quality services which meets our needs. And then in the actual strategy on page 21 for CFS departmental vision, Leicestershire is the best place for all children, young people and their families. And obviously on page 31 you've got this picture that shows this post of this little girl with this gentleman, this father, and it says that Leicestershire is the best place for all children, young people and their families. Now, could we... I wouldn't want reputational damage to the council. I wouldn't want other professionals or other authorities to look at this and think, well, that's quite a grandiose statement to make. We understand, of course, that this is the vision. So in order to head off that potential risk and also to reaffirm that it's our vision, the word that was actually used, ambitious, we could use another word, an A word, an aspiration. And so could we change where we mention about Leicestershire is the best place for all children, young people and their families to Leicestershire, the council aspires that Leicestershire becomes the best place for all children, young people and their families, or it is our aspiration to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Parton. I think what we've done is that we've missed some words out that set the context of what we're trying to achieve. So, as Director of Children and Family Services for Leicestershire, I remain committed that to the ambition that Leicestershire is the best place for children and families across the whole of Leicestershire. But it is a vision for the department. What we've done is we've lifted the vision and we've put it on page 31 without the context that it's the vision. So it remains the vision that Leicestershire is the best place for children and families. I think in order to provide more clarity, I think as Mrs. Seaton has also raised, we need to make sure that the context is included within the document so that it sets out that it's certainly our vision as opposed to a factual statement in time now.
Mrs. Page?
Well, it's been said what I was going to say, but just to repeat, I back Mrs. Seaton and Mr. Parton because it is a vision and it is priorities, so the wording need to be changed to will be or whatever. And I also think I would welcome to see, as the director said, a future report of measures and outcomes and, you know, what we have to have achieved. So it just remains one of my questions. I can't get my head around your care placement board, and unless I missed it, I haven't seen any explanation. Could you talk me through who the partners are, the care placement board, how are they elected, how independent are they, what do they work to? Because after all, they're taking on an overarching responsibility we are responsible for. So how do we know what they do and that they do it right, if you see what I mean? Thank you.
So the care placement board that we've alluded to within the report is a board that I chair and is an internal board to the department. But the governance of the care placement strategy and work that's being done as part of the care placement strategy will feed into the Children and Families Partnership, which is made up of a number of senior representatives across the partnership and chaired by Mr. Old. So the care placement strategy is an internal board that's chaired by myself and is made up of a number of my senior officers within the department, as well as some partners from other departments within the County Council.
And where do they feed back to? How does that, all amalgamate, and how does that square the circle?
So the Care Placement Strategy Board feeds into our department management team, which is the overarching governance, and regular reports are then also made to the Children and Families Partnership Board, but also through our corporate reporting processes as well.
Thank you. Well, I think we've all agreed that with a few tweaks, this is an excellent report. Now, if I could just ask for a couple of tweaks, not tweets. I don't tweet. If I could point out on page 18, second paragraph, I think the road to excellence, the figures just need changing. I don't think we're going from 2017 backwards to 2012. I mean, it would make me much younger, but I don't think we can go backwards. So before this goes out, finally, if that could be done. And also, I've just had a brief sort of thought with my Vice Chair, Deputy Chair here, is that on page 23, it seems to ring a bell. I'm looking at 7.1, the first bullet point. We thought the trilogy of risk, the wording had changed. We weren't sure it was still called the trilogy of risk. We thought there was another word or words now. Thank you very much.
Yes, you're right, but it's the other way around. So it was referred to previously as a toxic trio. We now call them the trilogy of risk.
Thank you very much. It just shows that we do read everything you send to us. But thank you very much. So on this, it is it's an update, and we've all received it. So we'll now move on to item 11, which is on page 35. Starts on page 35, and this is the overview of Special Education Needs and Disabilities Development Report by yourselves. Thank you very much.
I'll talk us through this report, if that's okay, Chair. So the report that is laid out in front of you does a couple of things, really. It sets out the results of the consultation relating to the new resource unit provision across the county for children with special educational needs and or disabilities. And it also sets out the current progress of SEND services within the local authority and future developments that we are working in partnership with our health colleagues, as well as the Parent Carer Forum, who are very well engaged with us in those to co-produce some of those services and policies moving forward. Just before I kind of highlight the key elements of the report, it's just important to set some context in terms of the landscape in which we're operating. Nationally and similarly locally, we've seen a significant increase in educational and healthcare plans, far larger than we projected, and we're now got over 4,000 educational healthcare plans within the system. But alongside that, given quite a stretched service, 97.5% of our first assessments for EHCPs are completed within the 20 weeks timescale, as we discussed earlier. So I'll take the report in the first part around the results of the consultation. As members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee will be aware, the Council are investing a £30 million capital into new and expanded specialist provision, and that's one of the three key strands in our high needs block development strategy, along with a focus on developing effective systems and processes to support children and families, and effective support services aimed at enabling schools to support children with SEND where appropriate to achieve within a mainstream school setting. So consultation on the proposals of the new provision took place between the very early in January and the end of March of this year, and it sought views on the provisions and how they should look and feel, but also how they should work alongside mainstream provision and the special schools that we have the benefit of in Leicestershire. It did include every Leicestershire school. They were all invited to participate, parents and carers, particularly of those pupils and children who do have educational healthcare plans, and other interested partners such as health. On top of a paper-based exercise, there were 5 open meetings held at various special school locations across the county, and they were open also broadly to members of the public. We had a good turnout and were attended by around 143 people. We had a good response, 345 responses to the consultation questionnaire that was sent out. The majority of those were provided online. Just in terms of the makeup of respondents, there was the majority of those were identified as parents and carers of children with education and healthcare plans, alongside members of school staff and children and young people themselves, and largely broader members of the general public. So the responses have obviously now been analysed, and we had significant levels of support, with the majority of respondents indicating a really strong agreement, and they were in favour of the proposals, particularly things around the potential for shorter travel times to school, and opportunities to be educated in mainstream school settings with the right support and outreach from area special schools. There was also support for the recognition of the need to give the priority to the development of more SEND provision, and the opportunity for pupils to have improved engagement with their local community, so being educated closer to home where appropriate. You'll see on the top of page 38 that the list of new provisions was agreed by Cabinet in March of this year, and they include a number of units and resource bases in mainstream schools, expansion of some existing special schools, and a longer term development of some new schools, specifically meeting that increase in demand that we've recognised for pupils with communication and interaction needs, and those with social, emotional, mental health needs as well. The first new provisions are opening from September, and others to follow throughout the academic year and September of next academic year. We've had a very good response to the call for expressions of interest from suitable academy proposers to operate the new school, which will be located in Barwell, and expected to open next September. And we're just in the process of enabling a decision to be taken by the Regional Schools Commissioner later in the summer on the preferred trust to run the new school. So that is the responses to the consultation. And just a couple of points around some of the improvements and developments to services and our future direction. So the Special Educational Needs Assessment Service is a well-managed service, but there is, because of that increase in demand, we have been looking at how we can improve that. We've now got a fully revised staffing structure in place with increased capacity. We've got a social worker now embedded in the service, and that's well embedded and supporting the links with social care. We've now got a post-16 team in place who are starting to work with FE colleges, as well as engaging with Parent Carer Forum and other representatives. There's still some work to do, and we're looking at that continued improvement of education and healthcare plans, and a move from the management of processes towards a more casework approach. The Educational Psychology Service has also completed a full service review. That's now completed, and there is some additional interim capacity in place to undertake some of that statutory work that we referred to earlier, and there is an improved quality assurance of some of that statutory work. The focus of that service moving forward is to have that much broader preventative focus that we've discussed earlier on today, and the wider use of the educational psychology expertise to support capacity in schools at a much earlier stage in a child's life, and ensuring that we've got sufficient capacity to support early years and early identification. Similarly, these specialist teaching services have been subject to a significant restructure, and with the main pressure on that service being around autism. So just in terms of progress today, we've mentioned the restructure. We've now got a strong and stable staff team, and for those schools that do trade with us, they have the traded offer is highly regarded. In terms of moving forward, schools, what we're looking to ensure is that schools have access to early specialist learning and support advice as soon as possible, and sometimes where appropriate in the absence of a diagnosis. And that there is clear advice and information available to all schools and parents and all interested parties via a strengthened local offer that, again, we're working with the Parent Carer Forum to develop. And finally, we've obviously worked to improve the provision of short break services to families where a child has a disability. And we're now working together with the Family Wellbeing Service to make sure that access to support to families through the short break schemes is made as early as possible. So that's a kind of summary of the report, Chair.
Yes, thank you. I've got a question in, I suppose, 4 parts. Do you want the whole lot, or do you want me to go one at a time? And we've got this paragraph 3 here on page 35, which sets the scene with the Cabinet predicting a deficit. Have we now got the 18-19 year-end budget position, firstly? If it is in deficit, as we were expecting it to be, when do you see this turning round? And then when you expect there to be a balanced budget, and how will the deficit be funded in the meantime?
So the high needs block outturn for 2018-19 was an overspend of £2.3 million. We've used our reserves, but also some underspend within the DSG to the rest of the dedicated support grant to offset this overspend. This level of overspend is in line with, if not lower than, some of the overspends that we're seeing across the country around the high needs block, and certainly the pressures on the high needs block that's happening across the country. In terms of the impact of the High Needs Development Plan, when we set out the High Needs Development Plan, we set it out as a 4 to 5 year programme that looked at how we can mitigate the or reduce the impact or increased projected overspend of the High Needs block. So the projections as part of the High Needs Development Plan are that there will be an increase in expenditure over the next 3 years, and then after that 3 years we'll start to see a reduction then in the overspend as the strategies and developments that are set out in the development plan start to kick in and start to have fruition. The projection is around, they're starting to reduce around 22-23.
That answers 3 of my questions. So that's the turnaround point. When do you actually expect to achieve a balanced budget?
The projection for a balanced budget will depend on a number of factors. Some of that will also include the high needs budget that's given from local government as well. So the projection around, if everything stays the same and that the delivery plan does what it needs to do, then we would be looking at a balanced budget I'm trying to do my maths correctly because I didn't write that bit down, around about 24-25.
Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you. A question really first is about the consultation. When it was, Paula, when you presented it, you acknowledged that it was a good turnout. So my question would be, to start with, was it a disappointing consultation or was it pleasing, the amount of responses you've got? Because I noticed you contacted all the schools and the parents. So I would consider that the response is very low compared to what you could put out. But were you pleased by that?
I think that the numbers, yes, we did go out to all of the schools, but obviously some of the schools will have more of an interest in the specific provision. So the quality of the responses and the turnout to the events, I think, was pleasing. And we've continued to have conversations outside of that formal process, certainly with colleagues from the Parent Carer Forum who are continuing to give us, I suppose, their thoughts on what some of those units should look and feel like. So generally pleased with the response because of the quality of the responses, really. So we feel confident that the units that we are developing, and we're still developing, the governance around all of that and what the links to the special schools and will be. I think I'm confident that we'll have the right provision in place come September.
Thank you, Chair. That is what I was after, the confidence in the amount of response you got. Part of the consultation did point out concerns such as larger classes, the expertise and the skills or training, suitable training for it. And I trust that will be well catered for. And the size of the classes, do we in our academies have any, well, I don't know, do we have any influence on that, or is it something that we have to put up with, or the children have to put up with? Thank you.
No, I think just two things really. One is obviously the comments that we received back as part of the consultation that raised concerns are as useful as the comments that were raising positivity. So we can certainly take those comments and we'll be building them into the development of the provision. In response to the class sizes, the units that we are looking to develop in mainstream will have restricted size to those units anyway. So we're restricting the numbers to around about 10 young people within those provisions. I think some of the concerns raised are around where children who are accessing the unit provision may then also go into mainstream and how that's managed. But part of the development of these units is about how we best support children to access mainstream provision as well as being part of the unit. So we will be restricting the size of the units, whether they're in academies or maintained schools. It'll be part of the model that we develop.
Thank you, Chair. One more, if I may. At the page 38, the last bullet point on there, this is just a point of clarification for me. A further move from the management of processes towards casework. And the note I've put on there is, what would be the noticeable change in that? Thank you.
I think just in terms of context, one of the things we've done very well in Leicestershire is around the conversion of our what were statements into education, health and care plans. And in order for us to do that, we were following some really tight processes around ensuring that things are done within timescales and that certainly that we'd had everything converted. So part of what we've been part of what we've been able to do, and our ambition is to continue to do, is ensure that cases are worked more holistically rather than just as a process in terms of the paperwork being done. Some of the way in which we've been managing cases is as a result of capacity, and as my colleague identified, there has been a significant increase in the number of children coming through. We have increased the resource within our SENA service, and therefore what we would hope will be now happening in the future is that families will be assigned a caseworker, as they already are, and there will be more capacity for that worker to certainly have a dialogue with schools and parents and carers in order to ensure best outcomes for those children.
Thank you very much for that.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first part of my question has already been answered. It's relating to paragraph 13, the responses. I actually was going to ask for a sort of a picture, an idea of the numbers we should be looking at. And I just wonder if you have any idea how many people have actually been consulted, because I wasn't sure whether 345 replies was adequate to come to a conclusion, but I heard what you said and I accept that, and it's great. But I wonder if you'd be kind enough to explain, my maths is hopeless really, but paragraph 14, because I see these percentages here and they seem to add up to a lot more than 100% in some of the responses. Now, can you clarify that for me, please?
I think that's just the way in which it's the options that were laid out in the questionnaire. So it's responses to different questions, if that makes sense. So that's not the overall response, because you're right, it does add up to more than 100. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, just to be clear, it reads that the majority of responders, 88%, indicate a strong agreement or tending to agree, and then we've broken down the 88% into 54% and 34%.
Rosita, Mrs. Page?
I'm the last one again.
No. No, you're not.
Oh, sorry. Well, anyway, in a way, this report is really, really good news because it says it puts the progress up to date in there and the work you have done. But on the other hand, this report is really, really frightening because it just absolutely frightens me to death because the increase is constantly rising. And, you know, we raise expectations by having wonderful aspirations. If you're looking in the previous report, if you're looking here now. So, but you said, that's Jane, hang on, the overspend across the country is recognised. That might be very well, but it is not recognised that we are one of the most underfunded authorities. So if our increase keeps rising and we can't manage our aspirations and expectations, and in your answer to Sean, you said we'll expect a balanced budget by 24. Well, that isn't likely, is it? Unless it stabilises, because I can't get my head around this. And I don't know if Mr. O wants to put a political slant on that, but I can't see how we can deliver this service as well with all of the progress in the future without having extra funding from government and partnership help. So just, you know, get my head around.
I'll pick up some of those points. You're right. The projections that we have around the not only increase in education, health and care plans, but the spend is a bleak trajectory. It's mirrored across the country in terms of the pressures around the high needs block. So you're right, the funding within Leicestershire is lower than other authorities, which potentially makes our challenge around our high needs block greater. Two things really. One is that there is national recognition across directors across the country that the pressures on the high needs block are probably the most difficult for local authorities, and that's exacerbated by the increase in numbers of children coming through with education, health and care plans. The strategy that we've taken within Leicestershire is setting up our high needs development plan, which is looking at a 5-year plan to mitigate that risk of both funding pressures as well as increased numbers of education, health and care plans. And we're confident that the strategy that we've put together will enable us to be successful over the next 5 years. But you're right, we do know that the pressures are increasing, both in terms of cost of provision, but also in terms of numbers coming up. So it does make it a very high pressured strategy. We remain committed to the fact that we need to do something and that we need to ensure that children are best supported or are supported as best as they possibly can do within this very challenging financial context. And we're ensuring that we are not only looking at how we can reduce the cost of children within our SEND provision, but also reduce the reliance on an education, health and care plan to enable support to be given. So as I was saying earlier, looking at how we can intervene earlier, how we can support schools to support children in mainstream as well. So there are a number of different elements to the strategy. But you're right, the SEND pressures remain one of the biggest pressures within local government at the moment.
Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. Questions in two parts, and they're quite separate, so I would deal with them one at a time. Paragraph 9 sets out big ambitions for the future, and it talks of developing a model of working and then goes on to explain the benefits of that. Have I missed something in that report, this report? Does this report somewhere explain what this new working model is, or is that something we'll know at another time?
I'll pick up bits and Paula may add in. I think we've followed up in paragraph 10 an overview about what the new model will look like. I think when we're referring to a new model, we're talking about the preventive work that I've alluded to in a number of the responses around ensuring that we don't have a reliance on education, health and care plans to get the provision needed, but that we're able to intervene early with children where necessary.
That makes sense. I just wasn't clear of the link of the two, particularly because the aspirations are quite sort of wonderful if we can achieve that. So it's certainly something that we're going to have to watch in the future, Chair, to make sure this is being delivered. Otherwise, the point that Rosita makes that you know the cost of undertaking these plans will continue to be a severe strain on our finances. So we will watch that with interest. The second question, Chair, is about paragraphs 22 to 24. This bit of the report felt to me like it was sort of dropped in a little bit separate to everything else. And I was particularly, it all looks good superficially because I was worried when Memphis contract was terminated, and it reads well, but at 24, Chair, it talks about developing a criteria for short breaks. Obviously, that implies that's different to the current criteria. Can I suggest, Chair, that when we set a future workload, we ask for a more detailed report so that we can just look into this and understand what's being proposed in the future?
Yes, thank you. Members will recall that we've brought a number of reports to Scrutiny to outline the work that we've done following the move of the short breaks and early support to children with SEND into the department. We can certainly bring a more detailed report. We very deliberately made this part of the work that we've been doing across our entirety of our SEND provision. But yes, we can bring a fuller report in due course.
Thank you very much. I think that's given a very full and positive discussion about this paper. I think on the whole we should be very proud, and so should the staff, of what they're managing to do under quite financial straits. And let us just hope that in the coming year or two we can get more money from central government one way or another. I think it is, as the director has pointed out, there has been a very sharp increase in numbers even in the last year, and this is something that maybe wasn't expected, but they have coped with it very well indeed. I'd now like to move on to item 12. Someone's keeping me up to date. Thank you very much. Which is the progress report on the Ofsted recommendations as part of the Continuous Improvement Plan 2017-2020, the Road to Excellence. And I believe that Sharon is taking us through this report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. The report outlines for the committee the progress made against the Continuous Improvement Plan. As committee members will be aware, since this plan was developed at the beginning of 2017, I have brought 6 monthly updates against progress against that plan and the 17 recommendations that were made by Ofsted. The report outlines, and members will be aware, and I don't intend to go through today all the background around the vision and how we're delivering on this plan, but for completeness in the report I've included that information to put into context for members. Where we are is that against the 17 recommendations that Ofsted made, 15 of those recommendations we have now rated green, which means we're making very, very good progress, and we feel that we've completed those actions. and there are 2 that remain amber. As members will be aware, at the start of this process, we identified that some of the recommendations required more detailed and longer term change. So although we have 2 recommendations that are amber, we are well on the way with those recommendations to achieving what we need to do. I've outlined in the report in paragraph 9 and 10 some of the progress and real progress that's been made generally in relation to the recommendations, and I'm happy to answer any questions in respect of that progress. But I have focused on the amber actions because, as members hopefully will recall, the last twice that we've been to this committee, it was felt to be more helpful for us to spend more time looking at those actions. So the two amber actions where we are making progress against, but are still on target to achieve what we need to achieve, but are still areas of ongoing work. One is around ensuring management oversight of practice fully complies and is evidence in all we do. And whilst there has been tremendous progress against that, that's outlined and evidenced by the outcome of our audit and performance reporting, we in January, having revised our supervision policy, we relaunched that policy along with further training for managers to ensure that supervision is far more reflective. And as those that follow the national picture, they will know that there's been a lot of research done by the profession about the importance of reflective supervision in helping social workers in moving forward children's cases, but dealing with the increasingly complex situations that our children and families suffer with. The other key area is around the consistency of social work assessments. So to recap, in 2016, our completion of social work assessments within our 45-day timeline, which is a government performance indicator, we were performing about 90-something% consistently. But when we looked beneath that, we weren't doing the number of assessments that we felt needed to be done, and we needed to do further work on the quality of those assessments. So a lot of work has been done in the last 3 years in getting an increasing number of assessments completed, right assessments on the right children, and therefore getting the right plans and provision in place. We took around last summer a refresh on that work and made the decision that we needed to ensure that we drove the quality of all those assessments, and we would have to, for a period of time, manage appropriately that we may not meet the target for the 45 days, but we needed to get the quality and work completed. That was something that we shared with Ofsted when they did our focus visit at the end of last year, because our performance was down probably around 50-60% being done within the 45 working days, and Ofsted could see the improvement in the quality and saw that that was the right way that we were moving forward. We have, as part of our campaigns to really embed practice for the period for January until now, June, we've had a clear campaign around the quality of assessment that's included a number of learning sets and work with practitioners to really drive home the quality of the assessments. We are now seeing a more consistent approach in the quality of assessments, and I can record and report that although the year to end date was showing us at about 64%, our month on month we're improved on the timeliness. Our month on month we're improving, and we're now into 70%. So we still have some way to go with the timeliness, but we can evidence that the quality has improved. I've then looked at giving the detail around the supervision policy, but from 14 onwards I've evidenced or put into more detail rather the work that's been done regarding our recruitment and retention strategy. Again, a national issue for the social work profession. There is national evidence that majority of social workers don't remain in the actual frontline practice for longer than 6 years. And authorities across the country have had varying amounts of success around the both the recruitment and retention of staff. For Leicestershire to provide the service that we want to provide for children and ensure that relationship-based practice and building up that relationship with workers, we obviously want to retain a good and sound workforce. So our recruitment and retention strategy, we don't apologise that that's been ambitious, that set about how we would recruit workers that included market premium payments for certain levels of staff. It provided information on our progression and our training offer to social workers and our work around ensuring manageable workloads so that workers can do the quality of work that they want to do and we want and need them to do. We have seen real success over the period with this strategy, and our vacancy rates are now very healthy. I do need to say that we have still some way to go with this, and there are key levels of posts that we are still struggling to recruit to, and they tend to be our senior practitioner level, so they are our experienced social workers. We're currently out to recruitment for 6 of those posts that we have vacant. We have had a number of challenges with the number of maternity leaves that we've been managing and are managing within the service. And though positive for those members of staff, it's obviously a situation that leaves us with to manage. And we have recruited over the last 12 months plus a large number of newly qualified staff. And whilst that brings an enthusiastic workforce, we make a commitment to, during that first year in practice, not only providing a quality support and training, but a reduced caseload. And to ensure that we've done that and can do it, we have recruited or employed a number of agency staff to work alongside to make sure that we can, from a capacity point of view, still meet the needs of families. What I can say and update is that by the end of September, 27 newly qualified social workers will progress to level 2. So that unless that's really positive, we will have a further 10 plus that will move to level 2 early in the new year, and we have 30 up to date 13 newly qualified workers who will start with us over the summer that we will need to support during their first year in practice. We have looked at this as a whole service recruitment and retention strategy. So we've also really pleased that we've been able to offer 6 apprenticeships to 6 unqualified members of staff within the service. This is a really good initiative. it's a way that we can show and give progression, and a progression for staff that come to us and show a real commitment. And in fairness, we know what we're getting. So we've got, these are workers that are tested, obviously not at a social work level, but they are tested people who have a real commitment to the authority. And those 6 people have started at Warwick University, and although early days are feeding back really positively them on how they're enjoying this training, but actually their team managers are reporting back the real enthusiasm and difference that they're bringing back to the teams. We have had a frontline unit, so we started with 4, we will end with 3 social workers who will move. It's a fast track scheme, supported nationally, and those 3 social workers will move to be newly qualified social workers with us from September. So they've completed, they are postgraduates, but they've completed their first year of training, if you like, within 1 year rather than it taking 2 to 3 years. Because that has been successful, from September we will have another unit, and we've been asked to take 5 people this year because their experience of Leicestershire has been very positive. So we've still got much to do. We have seen more success in reducing workloads in certain parts of the service than others for some of the challenges that I've said about covering maternity and sickness rates. I can report that we're seeing a reduction in the number of hours and days lost through staff sickness, which is positive. But we know that we need to focus on this area, and we have a paper coming to our departmental management team in the next couple of weeks that will talk about the second phase of our recruitment and retention strategy. So I think that outlines the key areas, unless there are any questions.
It's a very quick one. The grades that you've used to measure, have they been validated externally? Because I think we, as a committee, want reassurance that the grades are recognised as valid.
The RAG rating grades, yeah, they are. They are not set externally, but we provide and have provided as part of our annual conversation with Ofsted. We have to provide our progress against our self-assessment, and as part of our self-assessment, our continuous improvement plan. So we have to evidence how we believe we've achieved those things, and Ofsted will give us feedback on that.
Paige?
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is really, really comprehensive, and there's so much in it, but overall it's really, really positive. And I'm actually quite proud, and so should you be, that there are only just 2 ambers in the whole report. I also in particular liked, because performance targets, we set them, and they're national targets, and it's so much about percentages. And so therefore I'm really pleased to hear Sharon say that, what did she say, we need to ensure that the quality of the assessment, and I think that is what it's all about, the quality of the assessment and the outcomes, because at the end of the day it is about people and not about percentages. So anyway, here she goes. Now, I actually like all of these papers. I know you can say it's rather a lot, but when you go through it, from little successes, from doing a handbook for social workers to agreed service actions, you can all look it up and see it all. However, here she goes. First of all, if you're going to page 51 and it says target date 2020, it says in place. Then we are talking percentages, which becomes, because it doesn't follow through, it becomes confusing to me as a layman. So then we go to page 53 and then a target, March 2020, and it says 13, 13, 19. So I'm now really confused and I don't know what that means. So then I go further on, and then the target dates say 22%, 7%. And if as I'm confused now, and I don't know what you're talking about, if I read 7%, to me, that is really, really worrying. So does that mean we're only 7% on target to meet that? And then we go, that's page 57. And then we go down and it goes again, 514 and 192. And now I'm confused even more. So can you please explain that to me? And then go back to page 56. Yeah, 56. On the amber, it says, last one, as above, reference 4. Now, I can't find that either, so can you explain that to me? So just talk me through it, because as I'm sort of scrutinising you, I do not know how the timelines match and if they're valid and if you're on time and whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Page. Who's taking that on?
I'll take that, thank you. Under recommendation 1, the reason it says in place is that that's about a report that we're talking about needs to be system generated. So the reason there's not a number and a figure there is that that's an actual report that can be provided for us and printed. So it's not a target, it's actually something that will be in place. When we move to page 53, they are the numbers of caseloads. So the measure says monthly performance returns show that caseloads are within the above number. So these are the number of children that we are using as a guide to say that that's what those levels of staff should have to be able to work with, have a manageable workload and be able to do the quality of work that we require. So they are numbers of children. So in the first year, which is your assessed and supported year, we would want to work towards in 2020 that they have a supported caseload of no more than 13 children. Where we're up to with our target is that they have on average 16 children. So it's still a reduced caseload. We're still on target to what we want to achieve, but they are the actual numbers of children that we would want them to work with. When we talk about page 55, when we reference 4 above, we're referencing the above the recommendation. So recommendation 4 that's on page 54, the top of the column says reference. So reference 4 is we're actually referring back to that recommendation as well. Yeah. And in relation to the figures, to give some...
Sorry, hang on. So page, hang on, I'm just trying to be with you. So on page 56 then, the reference 4, it is reference 4 on page 54 in the corner.
Yes,
right,
yeah,
carry on,
yeah,
sorry.
Okay, so in relation to percentages, for some performance, a small percentage is what we're aiming towards, and for some, obviously, it's a high percentage that we're aiming towards. So, as an example, on page 57, where we're looking at the number of moves that a child in care has had, so placements, a low percentage is good because you would want as few as possible of our children to have suffered a number of placement moves. So 7.5% is not something to worry about, it's something to celebrate.
So may I interject again, please, if I may? Would it then not be prudent that within the target or whatever you have an arrow or anything that indicates, you know, which way it should go or something, so it would be easier for us to understand? Thank you.
Yeah. And then in relation to when you talked about 95%, that would be the pathway plan that's in place for our older young people who are in care, have a pathway plan that replaces their care plan. So for those, that would be a higher percentage that we're working towards, because we want our children to have a plan that's up to date, that's reviewed and is understood by them.
So all in all, it reads the target dates and the timelines and the achievements are very, very good. It is just the way it is presented there. So I think, you know, it might be prudent, as I just said, for you to make some sort of notes next to it. So, you know, it reflects how good it is rather than... No, thank you. That's really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you. I'll start with something that's not written down here. And when I'm on Charnwood planning, people always know I'm going to talk about permeable road surfaces because that's my bag. But also on here, it's percentages and numbers. So I don't really like your arrows going up and down as an indication. I would like to see the number of moves that individual has had to make, or I'd rather see the number than the percentage. For you, I think it's extremely important to have percentages because that's how you work. But I think if we're scrutinising it, I need to see the numbers. It would make it better, And of course, you've got to know the numbers to have worked out the percentages in the first place. That wasn't it. Hold on. Sorry. I might have to come back because I've forgotten what I got so excited about that. No, thank you.
Mr. Sheehan.
Yes, thank you. It's really good news on the recruitment and retention side of things. I believe Scrutiny did recognise the importance of this, and I'd like to think we actually made a difference with the focused and regular discussions we've had on that. I'd like to see that continue moving forwards. I think we need to keep a tight rein on the progress we've achieved here to ensure we don't lose ground that we've gained over the period that this has been current. And I think we should continue to receive reports on recruitment and retention outside of this Ofsted process.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. I agree with that. If that could be worked into the double words here, into the work programme, that we have a regular report. Because the last thing we want to see now is that having achieved good recruitment, that we start to slide. We need to know in advance whether things are holding up. Mrs. Seaton has now remembered what she was going to ask in the first place.
And it links with the last question as well, so thank you very much. Can I ask for the rationale or the thinking behind the newly qualified social workers being linked with agency staff rather than our own staff? Thank you.
Sorry, that might be, I've probably put that clumsily. They're not necessarily linked with our with agency staff. We link them with our senior practitioners and permanent staff who can support them. The use of the agency staff is to take some of the capacity so that we can allocate work to them. So the support to them is coming not from the support to develop them, although if we've got some really good agency, they may do some co-working on individual cases with them. It's really about giving capacity to the team and the service while our staff can support those ASYEs.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. As another excellent report, and it's looking good. Could I just ask another very small tweak in future? When we have the amber actions, as on page 47, and it tells us what they're, is there any chance we could have the page number they refer to? Because I sort of did wade through quite a lot of papers, because to my mind it's the amber, and if there was ever a red, which we hope there will never be a red, that we need to start read first, if you like, and then congratulate ourselves on all the greens. But it's only a small thing, but I must admit we did spend quite a few minutes trying to find the amber, particularly as quite rightly we're not in colour, we are in black and white, quite rightly, but if that could be done, that would be helpful. Page.
Oh, sorry. Can I ask one more question? It just occurred to me. So sorry about that. It is, Sharon, the tracking mechanism. How do you, there is so much in there. It is so comprehensive. How do you stay on top of staying on top?
Yeah, I don't sleep. No, we have a really clear structure in that my senior management team report on this data and receive reports from service managers on a weekly basis. I chair an extended SMT on a monthly basis where service managers and heads of service come with the data. We have data Chloe meetings, so this afternoon my head of safeguarding and improvement is chairing a meeting with the managers that's looking specifically at our performance and quality of assessments. So we will out of that track the progress, but also set the next actions that need to be taken. Within the performance, safeguarding and performance, I have key officers who are pulling together the quality assurance work and learning from audits, as well as the work around the monthly performance. And our colleague, our business partner in business intelligence, links into a performance SMT each month to keep us on track so we know exactly where we are.
That's fantastic, thank you. Now she can have some sleep, because I won't.
Thank you very much, everybody. We're now moving on to item 13, the Children and Families, the report of the Director of Children and Family Service pupils missing out on, and here again, if we could just check the spelling, education in Leicestershire. So I think this is going to be taken by Paula and Alison Bradley, Head of Service and Inclusion. So who's coming first? Right, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. You'll note that this paper is a response to the paper that I spoke to in November. The background papers to this are the children who are missing out on education, and it's very clear there is a typing error in the education bit, but the out bit in there is a really important factor that people do pay heed to when looking at this report. It isn't just missing education, it's missing out. So the background papers we've got here are the pupils missing out on education, the Forgotten Children's report I referred to earlier. On page 70, you'll see that the statutory duties of the local authority are also picked up. So those going through them, we've got the children with medical needs is a statutory duty that we adhere to by the local authority. Excluded pupils, that is a responsibility of us as the local authority. Children missing education, and I will just qualify that with the children missing education, that the definition is that children who are not on the roll of a school and are not receiving suitable education. We've also got elective home education, and I'll also draw your attention at this point, whilst I'm mentioning elective home education, in point 23 of this document, you'll see that we brought our elective home education services in-house as opposed to being out of commissioned out. This gave us the capacity to actually scrutinise those children who are deemed to be elective home education, and that we can work to provide better support for them. We also note on here that with the elective home education, that we, whilst the local authority does not have the specific legal duties there, that we do have powers that we can put into place, and those are noted following the elective home education bit there, that within Leicestershire we do follow the DfE guidance, and that children who are electively home educated and there is a refusal for our officers to go into there, that they will be referred on to safeguarding as a cause for concern. The summary of the findings here, we note that there are 901 children missing out on education. It's not that they're totally missing education, they're missing out on education. If I turn on to page 72, the table here puts more detail to those categories of young people, children missing out on education. You will note, as well as the error in the spelling of education, there is also an asterisk, there's a footnote missing to this report as well. We've got the children missing out on education categories here, so I won't go through them all in detail, but wanted to highlight to you where the asterisk is on children missing education, the definition that I gave to you earlier. There are 34 children, because we wanted to bring live data to you, 34 children who are not on the roll and who are missing out in education. The other 2 points that are asterisk there would have a definition to say that as Leicestershire we do know that we've got children on the roll but are missing 15 sessions or more, or there are pupils missing out on education who are missing under 15 days, but it's more of an attendance related or a court proceedings on there. Also highlighting in here that we've got children who are excluded, and you'll see that the data we've got there for 28 children who are excluded, sorry, that's on page 73. We've got children who are permanently excluded, which is 28, which whilst is low compared to some authorities, is still too high when you've got a young person who is permanently excluded, but it's a piece of data that shows us that we have got those young people missing out on education, but are provided for by, in the secondary sector, the Secondary Education Inclusion Partnership, and in the primary sector, the alternative provision of Oakfield Short Stay School. On page 75, you can see whilst we've got the live data that we've got for you to note from the November report, we've also got the developments within Leicestershire that note all the activities that are taking place, and we've got a further report to bring back to you in November about the review of all those and the impact that those different developments are having within Leicestershire. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sheehan?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've read what you've written in paragraphs 16 to 23 on pages 75 to 76. I'd like to see that knitted together into some sort of strategy with a bit more added in, something a bit more comprehensive. I mean, could you think about setting some targets, for example, faster reintegration when children are excluded and fewer repeat exclusions, something like that? Could we look at partnership working, particularly with the alternative provision people we've got in various places throughout the county? I've got Police and Crime Commissioner coming to see one in my patch in October, and obviously with the link to the Youth Offending Service, that seems quite relevant, and I know that the children that they've been working with, a lot of them have had issues in that respect, so I think we need to see how we can work together. I know they're outside of the system, but I think a bit more dialogue wouldn't go amiss, maybe. Could we be challenging other providers to improve their outcomes, particularly the schools and academies? Should we be lobbying government for support, more support where appropriate? For example, more powers to intervene where there's inadequate or unsatisfactory home education. I mean, it's galling that we can put a number to these children, but we can't seem to do a great deal to help them. Yeah, that's all I had to say, so over to you.
Thank you, Jane. Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank you. I think you're right. The work outlined in paragraphs 16 to 21 lend themselves nicely to us setting out our inclusion strategy. And as Alison set out, our ambition is that we come back in November to outline in more detail some of the work that we're doing around inclusion. So as part of the work that we've been doing within the department, and we've set out in those paragraphs, is we have pulled together a number of functions into an inclusion service, which is a new area of the department, which is specifically targeting work to support the children that we've outlined in the previous paragraphs. And a big part of that is our partnership work. So we are already successfully working with schools across the county, both academies and maintained schools, to ensure that children are remaining within education where possible. As Alison's outlined, our permanent exclusions in Leicestershire are low, although the use of fixed-term exclusions, again, it remains below kind of national comparators, is higher than we would want it to be. So our ambition is a part of that inclusion strategy would set out some of those aims, and certainly some of the work that we're doing to manage inclusion within schools. In relation to alternative provision, we do have strong partnerships in place with our schools through our secondary education effectiveness partnerships, and indeed they do use a number of alternative provisions within the department, and particularly for our children with special educational needs. We can only commission provision through registered schools, and the majority of those providers operate as independent or alternative provision that we can't directly commission, and certainly are unable to provide funding for, but would obviously encourage partnership working with the behaviour partnerships and certainly schools in those areas to support students. So the quick answer to your question is yes, I think we can come back with far more detail in terms of the work we're doing, but also the impact that's having on the outcomes for children as well.
Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you. Page 74. This is where percentages are needed. We're doing, in comparison, has just been pointed out with the permanent exclusions and the fixed period of exclusions. Nationally, we're doing very, very well compared to those results. But this is where I need a percentage now, you see. There's no pleasing me, I know, my husband says that. So we've got a number of permanent exclusions at 28, which obviously is higher than City, but it would be the permanent exclusion rates show you that it's identical. And so what are we doing that is any different with the exclusions? Are we managing them better than other authorities? And in what way are we managing them better?
Thank you. Compared for secondary, if I focus onto that, because of our partnership arrangements that we have, we passport out funds to the secondary schools, and they divide themselves into their secondary partnerships, and they avoid permanent exclusion and will put initiatives into place either in school or through the alternative provision that they have there. So compared to other authorities nationally, we do have a more bespoke arrangement that focuses on the needs of the young person and buys into a collective with the secondary schools that they look to avoid permanent exclusion as the consequence. Within the primary, we've got a different arrangements, but we are looking towards bringing that sort of geographical sort of pulling together of schools in the same way that the secondary schools are organised at the moment. But yes, we do put a lot of proactive intervention in place for all schools rather than looking for a permanent exclusion. We've recently put into place support for governance within schools as well, to make sure that the governing bodies within schools understand the consequences, and that if there is a permanent exclusion, the recourse that there can be if appropriate processes have not been explored. So that's all work in progress that I'm hoping to bring back to you in far more detail back in November.
Oh, that's excellent, thank you.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. Page 72, actually. Interesting figures about children missing out on education, and I just wondered if we go to the move from one area to another area and missing children education, one is 34 and one is 12, is there a geographical link to this? I just have the feeling from people I've spoken to in the area that I represent that yes, you can allocate a school, but the children, particularly the very young children, are not going to the school because the parents can't get them there. Because the Oadby schools are full up and bursting at the seams and seem to be educating half of Leicester City, moving in mid-term, you can't get a placement. And so consequently, you've fulfilled your duty, you've found them a school somewhere, but physically getting two children to do different schools at different parts of Leicestershire has proved impossible. It doesn't show up in these figures, so I wondered if you're able to give me some indication if South Leicester, Leicestershire, is the area which may be suffering from this.
I think, as you've highlighted, those children won't appear in these figures. So the children that we've identified in paragraph 8 are those that fall within the definition of children missing education. So it's quite a tight definition of, children missing out on education. The group of children that you're talking about do have a place identified, so they wouldn't appear as children who are missing education. If they're not taking up their place, then they may appear in the top two boxes with the asterisks, which is around children who are not attending their education place that has been named for them. So just on your next point around your geographical analysis of this, we haven't looked at geographical split of this because the issues impacting on this group of young people aren't necessarily around the availability of school places, or certainly the availability of school places where parents would prefer. This is about different groups of young people and the kind of vulnerabilities associated with those children being out of education. I think the questions you're asking are predominantly around admissions processes and availability of school places in some areas, which wouldn't necessarily impact on this group of children.
Thank you for that. But, Chair, there's still children missing school, aren't they? If they may tick the boxes here, but somewhere they must be showing up. Should they not? And we should be able to get some indication whether we have a particular problem in a particular area of the county. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, they wouldn't be included in this report. Sorry, that's what I was saying. So we know that there are particular areas within the county where there are more pressures around school places, around parental choice. We also know that there are children who are not accessing the education place that they've been allocated due to various reasons. So that would be a different report or a different piece of work that we would need to undertake in order to demonstrate that.
Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just interested whether you've got a little bit more information about the electively home educated. In here we talk about the number where we deem the education to be unsuitable, but how do we know, as we can't enter most houses, how do we know there are not hundreds more kids that are not receiving a good education because they're being home educated?
Okay, thank you. At the moment, we have the reports that we have about children that we know, and you're quite right to highlight the fact that there may be children that we don't know of. The latest government initiative for local authorities to hold that data would give us that information. But at the moment, we go on the information that we have about any young person being electively home educated, and then if we can't get past the threshold of the door, then that's when it would become a safeguarding. But we do give alternatives to the parents not to meet in the home but to meet elsewhere, as reported in here, to actually give us confidence that the young person is actually accessing suitable elective home education. But at the basic level, if we can't access that, then it becomes a safeguarding issue.
Could I ask a question, please? All these figures, could we know how many are primary school, or are these all secondary school? Or have I missed it somewhere, which I'm sure I possibly could have done? But it's sometimes useful to know whether, for example, taking up your point on electively home educated at home, of those 119, are the majority older children that should be in secondary school, or are they the primary school children that parents have not are doing it at home till they're 6 or 7, as I believe some parents believe that to go to school at 4 or 5 is far too young, and therefore we'll educate them for a while and then send them to school. So it might be useful to know what the split is, to help us with that type of thing. Thank you.
Just a response to that, yes, we do hold that data, and I can report that back in the split on that. So we've got that as by key stages, so it splits primary and secondary.
Would would we agree that that could be useful to us? Yes, thank you. Mrs. Page.
Thank you. On the same vein as Mr. Walsh's sort of comments, I'm sort of mystified over the numbers of Gypsy, Roma or traveller background, the numbers, because whilst we know what children, or some of the children, go to school, and we don't know which ones are home educated, but it is really, really difficult to gauge how many Gypsy, Roma and traveller children are there. Now, I know how many sites I have got within my division, and there are endless children. So I kind of find the number of 23 across Leicestershire extremely low. And so just for my own information, how do we gather that information? Because sometimes access to sites is difficult, you know, they travel, as it says. So how do we gather that information, and how do we come to the conclusion that, you know, there are only 23? So just get my head around that, please.
Okay, the data here is the data drops that the schools report back on, but I would acknowledge what you're saying is the fact that there are young people on those sites that you're identifying that we don't get, but we get the data reports from the school.
So all we've got here, it is what the reports from the schools which were registered and then don't turn up, so to speak, yeah? Thank you.
Anything else? No? No? Thank you very much. We now move on to item 14, which is the Leicestershire Children and Families Partnership Plan 2018-2021 progress update.
Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to present the progress on the Children and Families Partnership Plan. The plan is a strategic document that sets out a shared vision for children, young people and their families, and the priority outcomes that the partnership is seeking to improve. So the partnership has adopted 5 supporting outcomes to ensure the best start in life, to keep children safe and free from harm, support children and families to be resilient, ensure vulnerable families receive personalised integrated care and support, and enable children to have good physical and mental health. So the plan was officially launched on the 20th of September last year, and the report outlines a number of key updates against each of the priority areas. So in relation to priority 1, ensuring the best start in life, a number of pieces of work have been undertaken, some of it around an e-learning module for the 0 to 5 sector, around a graduated 4-step approach to supporting children. We've trained our improvement advisors to take on an area Senko role across the county, and we've also done a whole raft of communication around school readiness, which is about educating parents in preparation for school readiness across the county. Priority 2 around keeping children safe and free from harm. The Child Sex Exploitation and CSE Operations Group has met to agree plans to expand the remit of the CSE Hub into and include child criminal exploitation. And also funding has been secured for a partnership position of a strategic lead for child criminal exploitation, which will work to develop our operational response and supporting children across Leicestershire and Rutland. In terms of Priority 3, we've held some workshops led by the Department for Work and Pensions taking place in Hinckley and Bosworth area, and they're predominantly around helping us to understand the barriers to work for people living in that area. If the approach is proved successful, we'll then be looking at rolling that out across the county. We've already outlined some of the work in a previous report around ensuring vulnerable families receive personalised support and the partnership launch of the Promise to Our Children in Care and Care Leavers. And then in terms of the work around Priority 5, Public Health England has published a whole suite of mental health resources which are now being adapted for use at a local level. We've done some work around maternal obesity, and also we've launched some work around adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed approaches across Leicestershire. So in terms of future developments, action plans are now in place for work for 1920 across all 5 priority areas and expected to report around June time on progress in the first quarter. In particular, we are launching a leaflet around promoting the first 1,001 critical days, some new school readiness social media campaigns for professionals, and the work that we've outlined in our previous report around the LCC inclusion, remodelling the inclusion service in the County Council. And we're also working on a housing protocol with our district council colleagues, which we're hoping will be completed in the autumn of this year. And then just to end, we are developing a communications plan for this year to improve cross-partnership and wider communication for progress against the partnership plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Page.
Yes, and I think that is absolutely wonderful, and I know you say action plans are being developed, so when will we actually know, will there be a timescale, i.e. saying that workshops will be in Harborough in April and in Loughborough in May, and so the actual details, so we can get our teeth into it, advertise it, work with it, and make it really meaningful and secure really positive outcome.
Sorry, just to clarify, is that in terms of the rollout of the work with the DWP, Mrs. Page?
Yes, please, and also in relation to the housing one, whatever that is gone. Somewhere it said to work with the district councils.
Yes, sorry. Yes, so in both of those pieces of work, we have representatives from the district council, our district council colleagues on the Children and Families Partnership. So in relation to the rollout of the work around the DWP, once it goes out into areas, we will be promoting that across all of the areas. In relation to the housing protocol, yes, I think we would want to be doing something quite significant once we've signed off the protocol in terms of launching it, so we can pick that up with our colleagues to ensure that we are rolling out and certainly launching that across each of the areas.
Thank you very much for an excellent report. And another one. We now move on to item 15, and I hand over to Mrs. Seaton.
Very briefly. Right. This panel, this review panel, was established to consider the strengths and weaknesses of the County Council's current approach to corporate parenting, in particular the role of the elected members in corporate parenting. The panel was really impressed with the work of the virtual school and the range of activities it undertakes to support the children in care. We also felt that it was working to improve the educational outcomes and life choices. It was particularly active with the, and I forgot the word here. What is it when you get a job before you get a job? Apprenticeships, that's it, you see. I'm a woman of a certain age, sorry. So with the apprenticeships, lots of work had been done there, so we were very impressed with that. We were also pleased with the department's efforts to capture and involve the voices of children in care and care leavers, particularly through the Children's Rights Officer, which is something that the panel were not aware of. So we were quite impressed with the fact that the children are listened to that depth. The panel spent some time considering, the panel spent some time concerned with the role of the elected members in their corporate parenting responsibilities. And the area of recommendations that we focused on were to make the members more aware of their responsibilities. So recommendation A on page 111 sets out a proposed new role description for elected members, which we would like to see incorporated into the refreshed corporate parenting strategy. The panel also proposed improvements to reporting arrangements to members, and the provision of training to at least 2 years, every 2 years. We did discuss whether we could make it compulsory for members, but apparently we can't. So making it every 2 years was more acceptable, and hopefully that more counsellors will be able to undertake that training. Finally, the panel's recommended the establishment of member champions to further the interest of children in care and care leavers in areas of education, training and work, housing and accommodation, and health. The panel recognises that the role requires further development to ensure that there's clarity of scope, targets are achievable, and members' champions are properly supported and expectations are managed. Subject to any comments from the committee today, this report will be presented and hopefully adopted to the Cabinet on the 25th of June. Thank you.
Mr. Welsh.
I found it a fascinating piece of work. What struck me was how complex the whole issue is, and trying to bring it down to look at the role of elected members. We kept having to pull back to get into that, but I commend the report to members here, and I'd like to thank the work the chairman did in safely steering us through what at times appeared to be a minefield. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you for those kind comments.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yeah, I think this idea of encouraging members to develop their role as corporate parents is very interesting. And I think we need to make sure there's enough clarity to inform them as to what that entails, but also that we give them the right encouragement to actually buy into this, because that's the difficult part, I think, with some members. And I think as well we've got an interesting task for the group whips if we say that we're going to have 3 member champions appointed on merit, because that means it goes across party, and that's going to be a very interesting one to try and sort out, but we'll see.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Dr. Phelps.
It's actually picking up on our chairman of this panel's comments just now, which, yeah, this looks like an excellent piece of work. And it was actually on page 111, and it's the recommendation C. I think you must have picked it up when you're reading it. The wording needs slightly amending, because it should say education, the 3 champions should be education, training and work. Yep. Housing and accommodation and health. Just a matter of amending the, yeah, typical. Thank you very much. That's it. Fine.
Thank you. So this report will be accepted by this panel and it will go forward. This board. Thank you very much. And I would like to also thank the chair, for Mrs. Seaton, who was the chair of this panel, to take us through it. I sat on it, and like most people who sat on it, it was hard work. It was very interesting, but I think it was very worthwhile, and I think the recommendations that have come out of it and the conclusion shows that it was wide-ranging and very good and something to work on. Thank you very much. We now move on to the final report of the day, which is the Q4 2018-19 performance report. And as per a previous one, we have better, similar, lower and better as the guidelines this time in this report, almost the arrows. Thank you very much. Who's taking this? Sharon.
Chair, if I start and take members through the first part and the social care performance, and Paula will give the detail around early help and education. So this is our Q4 report. A key thing to note is that a new strategic plan has been agreed by the Council around the new indicators that have been added for 2018-19 to reflect the new outcome framework, excuse me, which includes additional social care indicators that are monitored on the recommendations of Ofsted. As a general overview of 27 measures that we report against, 9 have improved, 14 show no significant change, and 5 have declined. And there are 2 indicators that provide information with no polarity. So from 19 measures that have a national benchmark, 6 are in the top quartile, 6 are in the second quartile, 6 in the third, and 1 is in the fourth. And in relation to children most at risk and protected from harm, the details are there in the report from point 7 to 12. But what we report is the number of child protection cases reviewed within timescale is 97.3%. So that is a slight improvement on the last quarter and remains good by national levels. It actually places in the second quartile, so I'm not sure what you have to do to get in the first, but we're doing well on that. The percentage of children becoming subject to a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time decreased during the quarter, and we are reporting a good year-to-end figure for those children, so or repeat plans rather. So as the committee will know, this has been an area of real focus of work and continues to be. Percentage of re-referrals stood at 22.3%, slightly higher than the third quarter. It places us in the third quartile of local authorities, but we're better than statistical neighbours. And I can inform you that our year-to-date figure that we were reporting later is showing that percentage is coming down, so we're moving in the right direction. Percentage of single assessments I've talked about in the previous report was 60.3% at the end of the quarter. That is lower than where our target needs to be. The detail of that I've covered in the Ofsted report, but can show that our performance is improving. We had no child protection plans lasting for 2 years or more. We do monitor and have shared with the child protection members panel how we've audited those cases that are above the 12-month period, and the work we do to ensure that children aren't staying on child protection plans too long, and therefore that means that we're not moving that work forward as we need to. And there were 95 referrals of child sexual exploitation. So percentage of children with 3 or more placements during the year was 7.7%. That's 45 children. That's better than Q3 and places us in the top quartile nationally. The percentage of children in the same placement for 2+ years or placed for adoption was 65.7%, and that's 139 children. Percentage of care leavers in suitable accommodation for the quarter was 89.5%, slightly lower than the third quartile, but we do, and places us in the second quartile of other local authorities. That is a figure that is increasing and we are improving on in this period. And the percentage of care leavers in education, employment and training was 61%. So that's a higher and improving picture compared with other local authorities, our stat neighbours, but obviously is an area that we would aspire to continue to increase. Percentage of children in care who've had an annual health assessment within the last 12 months was 85.6%, so that is higher. That's an increasing and improving picture. And the percentage of children in care who've had dental checks was 79.5%, and we've put the numbers of children in brackets for you. And the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, which we've talked through at previous committees, which is a number that is given to based on an assessment of a youngster around the strengths and difficulties, especially of their emotional well-being. What we would look for is that we would want that children that score between 14 and 16. A 0 to 13 is seen as those youngsters that are children that aren't suffering any additional emotional harm. 14 to 16 is borderline, and 17 to 40 would be those youngsters that their emotional well-being would give us cause for concern. The mean score for Leicestershire children was 15, which puts them in the borderline. But we have shown in here the scope. So we have children that range very low and are seen not to have any additional emotional needs. But we've got there one young person whose emotional well-being is of concern, and they will be provided with and be receiving additional services because of that. I think that takes us through most of them for the social care. So, Paula.
Okay, so I'll pick up the early help and education performance. The numbers of families receiving targeted early help in the final quarter of the year remained similar to that in the previous Q3. Slightly higher numbers, but if you can, that is families, the numbers of families. So where you can see quite a big difference in the 2058 to 2095, that can be to do with the size of families that the service works with. The Supporting Leicestershire Families programme, as was previously, has claimed payment by results for 1,596 families. So that's 58% of the overall target for Leicestershire to date. And our trajectory to reach the target remains strong. And we've got a new claim due this current quarter of 1920. In terms of the youth offending service data, the numbers for the first time entrance to the criminal justice system again remain stable and in comparison to the same quarter last year. The rate of reoffending for young offenders is reported a quarter in arrears, so just to note that. And again, whilst there's a slight increase, that the trajectory remains positive. we've had, and in the final, in the Q3, there were no young people sentenced to custody, but just noting that that figure is normally very low. In terms of education and children achieving their potential, the number of 2-year-olds taking up their place, their fee entitlement, remained stable, so no concerns there. And similarly, in terms of the number of providers rated as good or outstanding, it is high at 95%, and this compares favourably with our statistical neighbours. Again, the percentage of Leicestershire schools rated as good or outstanding remains stable. And we've got percentages and numbers in those in the data there, so you can see that the numbers of schools that are achieving good or outstanding Ofsted judgments remains good. The percentage of primary schools similarly good, at around 87% at the end of Q4, achieving good or outstanding. Again, this remains stable. There is, and then our good and outstanding special schools remained at 100%. And finally, the NEET data for young people not in education, employment or training, again, we compare favourably with our statistical neighbours at 2.3%. The NEET figure for young people with special educational needs and disabilities has slightly improved, and it is an area of focus for us, particularly as we start to plan our approach to transition for young people with SEND, and how that is manifested in quality EHCPs for as we transition young people from children's services into adult services. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to take issue with one of these measures, and that's the one that's on page 122 about the average emotional health strength difficulty score for children in care, and you give an average figure for the whole cohort. There's no such thing as an average child. This is a fairly meaningless figure. You're not really measuring anything here. There's no sense of the range of the children within that, what can go from 0 to 40, or the distribution where they are. In fact, you risk the less vulnerable masking the needs of the more vulnerable. So I think we need to look at that figure and find a better way of measuring this.
Thank you.
We've set out the detail of it in paragraphs 18. So we've set out the span of results back. So what we've reported in the table is the average score, but we've set out the detail of the numbers of children within each of the areas in paragraphs 18. So the single detail is the average, but we've set out here where the children fall.
Mr. Kaufman?
Just an explanation, because I can't understand it, please. Page 123, that table at the back, we've got percentages in the final column, and these are actual numbers, are they?
Found it, we're okay.
Okay, all right.
Right,
Thank you.
found it.
All right.
We knew there was a legend somewhere.
Sharon, you want to come back?
Yeah, I've just
Mr. Kaufman?
I've just read paragraph 18 and I was searching for the extra information. It appears to be in the last sentence there. The scores for Leicestershire children range from a low of 1 to a high of 31. Is that the only additional information that you're offering me?
Sorry, I was also referring to the additional information that Sharon gave when she was giving an overview of the paragraph. So my apologies, Mr. Sheehan, it wasn't written in detail, but Sharon gave an overview of the span of data. We can give some more again if you'd like.
No, I think the point stands that the statistic as presented is an average, which doesn't tell you much about the children as a whole. It gives you a meaningless figure. I think we just need to reflect on how we present that information. I think there's better ways of doing it. That's all I'm saying.
Mrs. Page?
Thank you. Just one point. Well, two. I like the way the performance data is set out, page 121 onwards, because you can see there if it is compared to previous data point better or lower or similar, so you get a far better idea of what you're looking at. However, my question is, the page 121, single assessment completed within 45 days. If I recall, that was read the last time around. So why is that so low, and what can we do to improve that?
Sorry, that links to the detail that I hoped that I'd given as part of the work around the Ofsted recommendations, where we talked about our completion rate within 45 days had at the start of this plan been very high, but we had not been doing enough assessments and the quality wasn't as we wanted. So we've done work to look at the numbers. And then we'd done work that had stopped really and paused to make sure that the quality is as we need it to be. So that's been part of the assessment campaign and is part of our planned work and work that we did share with Ofsted when they came in to do the focus visit about we wanted to make sure that the quality was right and that we wouldn't be signing off assessments before we were convinced of that. What we will be showing over the next period is how now we've got those two things working as they should, that the timeliness will improve. And what we are seeing in this quarter is a steady improvement in the timeliness as well.
Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you. I'd like to focus on the rate of reoffending by young offenders on there. That is... it's always a quarter in arrears. If you could just explain to me why that's a quarter in arrears, please.
Yeah, it's a relatively complicated way in which we measure the rate of reoffending. So we take a cohort of children who have offended within a quarter, and we track that cohort of children over a period of 12 months in order to look at their reoffending. So the reason it's in arrears is because we need to wait for the data to come through around offending. So it's a relatively complex way of recording it, but it means that our data is always slightly in arrears in terms of reoffending rates. But it's to do with the tracking of the children and the monitoring of their reoffending rates.
Thank you. And I know you said that it's gone up, but only slightly. It doesn't, looking at the rectangles to the right of it, it doesn't look as though it's slightly, if I'm going to judge that there. But 78, I presume that's percent, is it? Or 0.78, right. So how many is that? And if we haven't got the numbers there, because I do note, and thank you very much, that I have got individual, that not I, but the panel has got individuals in brackets, but there's quite a few that haven't got individuals. Is that because of protecting certain data of individuals, or what?
Again, the way in which the reoffending data is calculated, again, is relatively complicated. So this rate of reoffending is per young offender. So within the cohort that I identified, we monitor the reoffending rate of that those young people, and we take an average of that reoffending rate across that cohort. So you're right, there is an increase from 0.4 offences per offender up to 0.78 is a relatively significant increase. A lot can depend on the numbers of young people within that cohort and the kind of complexity of children within the cohort. So one of the things that we've said over the time with around the reoffending data is that our reoffending rates remain very low, so they remain below 1 per offender. But actually, changes within the cohort can have a significant impact on that reoffending rate. So the smaller the cohort, the greater the impact of more complex children can have on that cohort. So At the moment, we would focus on the fact that our reoffending rates are far lower than our statistical neighbours and therefore remain good. Because the cohort numbers are low, we see quite significant jumps within the rates. It's similar to our custody rate. So if we have one young person in custody, the rate of custody is significantly higher, and because our numbers are so low. So I think really importantly at the moment, the message would be that our rates of reoffending by young people remains low, and whilst there is a change, some of that is to do with the complexity of the cohort and certainly the cohort sizes.
That comes to the end of the business of the meeting. Please note the dates of future meetings for the rest of 2019-20, and I look forward to seeing you all here. And also, if I could bring to your attention the pink paper that you've got, which is the letter to the Department of Education and the response. That's just for noting and assimilating. No other items have been brought to my as urgent for consideration at this meeting. I'd like to thank you all very much for attending, and I'd like to thank you very much for making my first chairmanship of this committee as painless as possible. And as I won't be seeing all of you en masse like this until September, I know it's a bit early, but I wish you all a very good summer and see you in September round the same table.